Hi, I'd like to show you a few ways of glazing your cups. I've got the slab mug ready. This is a carved one. Make sure before you put any glaze on the piece to go over it carefully to make sure there aren't any sharp things, particularly where the handle is or your signature. So I'm going to go and just run over it with my fingers, and if there's anything at all, get rid of it. It looks pretty good. Now, you could use a little sandpaper. Not much. The glaze, remember, is going to make it smooth. Now this one, I'm not putting any wax on the bottom. I'm just going to wipe it off with a sponge. So before you do anything else, if you've done any sanding, go over it with a damp sponge and get rid of any of the dust. What you don't want to do is get this soaked, because if it gets wet all the way through, you won't get a decent coat of glaze. Now, sometimes when you attach things to ceramics, you may get a little cracking right at the join, particularly if you didn't clean it off or compress it. Well, usually it's just a little surface crack. So fix that at this point too. Okay, this is ready to go. So first thing you do is choose a glaze. You have options. You can do one solid glaze. So here's a nice glaze that's called Winnaker Yellow, and it's thicker, it goes more yellow, thinner, it goes more orange. So it's very, very good over texture, as long as you don't put it on too thickly. This one's called Dr. Bob's Violet, and it shows the texture really well. You just put one glaze on and everything shows through. One of the classic glazes would be a Celadon. And a Celadon breaks and is lighter on the high points and darker on the recessed areas. You can see particularly on the handle, this is very smooth. When I put the glaze on, you could hardly see any of these marks. But as the glaze melts, it's semi-transparent, so you can see right through it. Other things you could do is stain the glaze. And you stain the pot underneath, I'll show that in a minute. Stain it with a ceramic wash, and that's a metallic oxide like iron or cobalt, or maybe a combination of different things. And you brush it on. It's almost like ink, very, very thin, and then take a sponge and wipe it off. Now, it's very important that you wipe it off so it goes into all those cracks and crevices, and you don't have a coat of the ceramic wash on the surface. That would resist the glaze and make bare spots on the piece. You could just glaze the whole piece in one glaze. This is a glaze called Algae Green. And then take a sponge and wipe off the glaze so it just stays in all the cracks and crevices. So it's in all those recessed areas. Let me show you how to glaze this. I'm going to just do a very simple overall glaze. I'm going to use the Winnaker Yellow. Now remember, when you get a glaze, they're minerals that are suspended in water. They don't dissolve in water. They are suspended. So what happens is, if you don't use it for a while, it's just water on the top. The glaze is down at the bottom. So you have to stir this up. Lots of ways to stir it. I like to use my hands. You could use a whisk. You could use a stick. You could use an electric drill with a plunger attachment on the top. Lots of possibilities, but what's very, very important is to get it all stirred up into suspension. And you'll know it's right when it's kind of creamy. It shouldn't be thick like paste, it should be, or slip, and it shouldn't be thin or watery. It should be somewhere in between. Now, how do you check? The potter's way of checking is to put your finger in and see if it coats your finger. Remember when I dipped it in the glaze with the water sitting on the top, it was just water. Now I'm going to dip it in and it coats my finger. I can still see my fingernail, but it's got a nice coat on it. And you'll find with experience, some glazes are better thicker, some glazes are better thinner. This is a nice consistency for this glaze. Remember, this is strange. What gives it the color is red iron oxide, and with the chemical components in here, this turns into this after the firing. So I'm going to start. This is by far the simplest. You could, if you had a big enough container, just dip it in, turn it over, shake it out, let it dry, and put it down, and then touch up the bare spot. I don't have enough glaze to dip this in, so what I'm going to do is pour it. So I'm going to pour the inside and then dip the outside. Fill it up about halfway, turn it, and the time it takes to turn it all the way around and pour it out is just the right amount of time to get a very good coat of glaze on there. Now I could stop right now, but I'm going to dip it down and get that lip dipped. Now for an average coat of glaze, it's 2 to 3 seconds. I'm turning it so that last little drip kind of rolls around the edge, and you can see how quickly it dries. Might take 30 seconds, a minute to dry. And again, glazes will vary depending on what's in them. Some components will make it dry a little bit slower, and some, like this one, dry really quickly. Where it's a little bit thicker, it'll stay wet a little bit longer. So you wait till it's dry. How do I grab this to be able to get the whole thing in? Just put your hand in and hold it like this. Now, because I glazed the lip, I could, on a larger piece, I could hold it like this. So I'm going to put my hand in and out. Give it a good shake. Make sure everything's covered. Let those last drips go. Now, while you're waiting, it's still very wet on the bottom. I can start wiping the bottom. Remember, you can't have any glaze where it's going to be sitting on the kill shelf. So the bottom and up, probably about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, should be unglazed. So it's dry to the touch now. I have a lot of glaze still on the bottom. Now to get this off, you take a clean sponge that's damp and wipe it. And then keep cleaning that sponge and wiping. And I'm going up about that much. Now, I'm not worried about having a little bit of glaze in my signature. You'll really be able to see it. So keep turning the sponge, keep the sponge clean, wiping it until it's as clean as that. Now, this is how this cup is going to come out. The longer you leave it in, the more yellow this one will be. The quicker you dip it, the more orange. So that one's ready to go into the kiln. The next one I'd like to show you is putting a wash on it. That's how I did this one. This is a black wash. Here is an iron oxide wash. Cobalt makes blue. Chrome makes green. So I'm going to do a little bit of cobalt and a little bit of iron. Now the washes, this guy up. Always cover up your glazes, by the way. Washes are really metals. There's cobalt, and it comes in oxide, and this is carbonate, cobalt carbonate. And what's strange about this is it's kind of pink. So you want this to be quite thin. If you put it on too thick, it will go almost black. So very kind of watery. You put a little bit on the side of this, and you can see how thin and watery it is. And it should kind of run. Another way to check it is to try it on some bisque. See, I can see right through it. That'll be a deep blue. And it will only be a deep blue if I put either clear glaze on it or Celadon glaze on it. If I just left that alone, it would almost be black. It wouldn't have the blue. A little bit of this goes a long way. So, stir it up. And I'm just, getting it into the cracks and crevices here. Very, very thin, very thin. Now be careful with this, because if you get it on your fingers and put it somewhere else, say I put it on the inside or on the lip, you'd get a blue spot. You may want to have your fingerprint on it for centuries. I want to try to keep this pretty clean. After you get all of the oxides on there, remember you could layer them. I could put the green on there, which is the chrome. I could put the iron, which is the brown to black. Right now I'm putting the cobalt on there, which with the clear glaze will be blue. Think of Ming Dynasty. Think of the blue and white ware. It's been very, very popular throughout the centuries. Now, come back with a sponge and wipe it. And it kind of forces it all in there, and also gets the dust that might be there off. So when you go to glaze it, you'll get the color you want. I'm going to add a little bit of iron. Now, check this out. Water on the top, iron on the bottom. So you got to stir it up. I always like variety. That variation, if it's just one color, sometimes it's a little bit boring. So I'm going to come back and add a little bit of this, and that cobalt's going to dominate. This looks very, very strong right now, but it ends up being pretty weak. Just a little variation in there. I'm being kind of casual about this, and it comes out beautifully. You can be very particular if you'd like. Depends on your personality. I'm going to wipe it again. Now, you may notice that that iron kind of smears, stains the clay a little bit. Well, that's okay. That's okay, because what will happen is the iron's very, very weak. Cobalt's very strong. That'll dominate. And this is very, very similar to what I did with this one. This one I happen to use the black wash. But you can see in some areas there's some staining. That's that cobalt. You can see on the handle there's some staining. Inside it's absolutely clear. That's the glaze that I put on it. So this is ready to glaze. Now be careful when you wash it off. Don't soak it, or you won't be able to put glaze on it right away. Okay, I have a bucket of clear glaze here. Oop, I missed a spot. Just make sure you don't have anything sharp on the handle. Okay, now I can pour the inside, dip the outside like I did the other cup. I have a little bigger bucket here. I'm just going to dip the whole thing in. Remember, I've wiped off the wash. Don't leave just straight wash on the surface. I'm going to go in and out. Let it drip. Give it a shake or two. Put it down. Touch it up. You've got your built-in brush here. That's where my finger was. I have a good coat of glaze on there. There are a couple spots where the wash actually resisted the glaze. Have to wait till that dries. Leave it to dry. So here I have Temoku. And I've got a nice little cup. Make sure it's clean. All the dust is off of it. Stir up your glaze. Now this one I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Stain the outside. Now, if I just left it on this thick, it would be almost black. Kind of a gunmetal color. You see all those little fine lines? All those are going to show. Take a sponge and wipe it. Keep cleaning the sponge. You see how all those lines now are emphasized. And this one, I'm going to leave the outside raw. Just dry clay with the brown wash on it. And just glaze where the handle is. Check this out. Go over your name. Wipe it off. And all of a sudden your name really will pop. So, pour the inside. Turn the cup. And as you're turning it, pour out the glaze. And I'm going to dip down, maybe 1/4 of an inch, so where my lip is going to be when I use the cup, there's going to be glaze. And I'm going to dip the handle because I want that handle glaze too. I've got a little glaze left on the bottom. Wipe it off. So now we'll have glaze on the handle, glaze on the inside, and raw clay elsewhere. This one's ready to go. My friend Gary, a wonderful potter, he used to call this the Glazed Dance. And that's where you do one thing, move over, do something else while something's drying, and keep bouncing around till all your pots are glazed and ready to go. So I'm wiping it up, 1/4 of an inch. And on these cups, I made a bevel, so it's a very easy thing to do. And I'm not worried about leaving glaze in the cracks and crevices because the glaze isn't going to run out. This glaze is very stable. It's just going to stay in there and it'll be shiny where all those marks are. Now, you can see here, there are little holes where the glaze was resisted a little bit. So what I'm going to do is fill them up with a little bit of glaze. So before you put the piece ready to fire, check it out and make sure there are no bare spots. There are no places where you can see all the way through to the clay. Just a couple in here. In this cup, I left texture on the inside. Kind of like that surprise. And the glaze will make it sanitary. The glaze will seal it. Just look it all over. Any little bare spots. Make sure they're covered. And instead of brushing the glaze, kind of dab it on. Ah, there's a big spot. See right there? The cobalt resisted a little bit, so I'm just going to flow a little glaze into those cracks. Cover up those holes. Now, if you left it, there'd be dry spots there. Wouldn't be totally glazed. So just kind of go over the whole thing. Make sure everything is glazed, except the bottom. I could come back and use a brush and put accents of the wash on top. I could put accents of another glaze on top. But remember, glaze is not paint. Glaze on glaze, you'll get unpredictable results. Even one glaze on top of another, and if you reverse it, put the first glaze on top of the second glaze, you'll find it'll be a different color than you expect. That's why potters are always testing and trying different combinations. And out of 100, you may get one that you really, really like. You may get a signature glaze. People go, how'd you do that? I always like to share. So after this is fired, all that cobalt, all that iron will bleed right through. It'll be clear on the inside and it'll be stained on the outside. So that's several ways of glazing. Now, remember, I could have, on this one, for example, I could glaze the inside, dip the outside with a different glaze, just as long as you overlap it. Now, overlapping's okay. Look at this cup where I overlapped. This is called tomato red and market blue. It's overlapped, I get a black line. This is the Winokur yellow with the iron wash. That iron wash, this is iron and rutile. It's a little bit different, but just straight iron on this one. Iron wash, put on, wiped off, dipped in Winokur yellow, and the inside poured and dipped down for the Temuku. This one, you can see how the Temuku moved a little bit. So, unpredictable. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but that's half the fun. If you just stain it like this is what you'll get. So, inside will be Temuku, that dark brown. Out here, it's going to be this with the raw clay and dark brown to black in all the recesses. So that's what I wanted to share with you on glazing some cups. So lots of possibilities. Oh, one more thing. Remember I went over brushing glazes. That's on the other video. You could brush areas. Just remember, make sure it's on thick enough. 2 to 3 coats, and you'll get a nice coat, very much like dipping. Okay, thank you very much.